In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon advanced against Jerusalem and laid it under siege. Now, the Lord delivered King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power, along with some of the vessels of the temple of God. He brought them to the land of Babylonia, to the temple of his God, and put the vessels in the treasury of his God. The king commanded Ashpenaz, who was in charge of his court officials, to choose some of the young men, some of the Israelites who were of royal and noble descent, young men in whom there was no physical defect, and who were handsome, well-versed in all kinds of wisdom, well-educated, having keen insight, and who were capable of entering the king's royal service, and to teach them the literature and language of the Babylonians. So the king assigned them a daily ration from his royal delicacies and from the wine he himself drank. They were to be trained for the next 3 years. At the end of that time, they would enter the king's service. As it turned out, among these young men were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But the overseer of the court officials renamed them. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar. Hananiah he named Shadrach. Mishael he named Meshach. And Azariah he named Abednego. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the royal delicacies or the royal wine. He therefore asked the overseer of the court officials for permission not to defile himself. Then God made the overseer of the court officials sympathetic to Daniel, but he responded to Daniel, "I fear my master, the king. He is the one who has decided your food and drink. What would happen if he saw that your appearance looked malnourished in comparison to the other young men your age? If that happened, you would endanger my life with the king." Daniel then spoke to the warden, whom the overseer of the court officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. "Please, test your servants for 10 days by providing us with some vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then compare our appearance with that of the young men who were eating the royal delicacies. Deal with us in light of what you see." So the warden agreed to their proposal and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, their appearance was better, and their bodies were healthier than all the young men who had been eating the royal delicacies. So the warden removed the delicacies and the wine from their diet and gave them vegetables instead. Now as for these 4 young men, God endowed them with knowledge and skill and all sorts of literature and wisdom. And Daniel had insight into all kinds of visions and dreams. When the time appointed by the king arrived, the overseer of the court officials brought them into Nebuchadnezzar's presence. When the king spoke with them, he did not find among the entire group anyone like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and insight the king asked them about, he found them to be 10 times better than any of the magicians and astrologers that were in his entire empire. Now Daniel lived on until the 1st year of Cyrus the king. Darius the Mede took control of the kingdom when he was about 62 years old. It seemed like a good idea to Darius to appoint over the kingdom 120 satraps. Over them would be 3 supervisors, one of whom was Daniel. These satraps were accountable to them so that the king's interests might not incur damage. Now this Daniel was distinguishing himself above the other supervisors and satraps, for he had an extraordinary spirit. In fact, the king intended to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Consequently, these supervisors and satraps were trying to find some pretext against Daniel in connection with administrative matters. But they were unable to do so, unable to find any such damaging evidence, because he was trustworthy and guilty of no negligence or corruption. So these men concluded, we won't find any pretext against this man Daniel unless it is in connection with the law of his God. So the supervisors and satraps came by collusion to the king, said, O king, live forever. To all the supervisors of the kingdom, the prefects, satraps, counselors, and governors, it seemed like a good idea for a royal edict to be issued and an interdict to be enforced. For the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human other than you, O king, should be thrown into a den of lions. Now, let the king issue a written interdict so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be altered. So King Darius issued the written interdict. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees and prayed and gave thanks before his God, just as he had done before. Then those officials who had gone to the king came by collusion and found Daniel praying and asking help before his God. So they approached the king and said to him, Did you not issue an edict to the effect that for the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human other than to you, O king, would be thrown into a den of lions? That is correct, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be changed. Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the edict that you issued. 3 times daily he offers his prayer. When the king heard this, he was very upset and began thinking about how he might rescue Daniel. Until late afternoon, he was struggling to find a way to rescue him. Then those men came by collusion to the king and said to him, Recall, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no edict or decree that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and Daniel was brought and thrown into a den of lions. The king consoled Daniel by saying, Your God, whom you continually serve, will rescue you. Then a stone was brought and placed over the opening to the den. The king sealed it with his signet ring and with those of his nobles so that nothing could be changed with regard to Daniel. And then the king departed to his palace, but he spent the night without eating, and no diversions were brought to him. He was unable to sleep. In the morning, at the earliest sign of daylight, the king got up and rushed to the lion's den. As he approached the den, he called out to Daniel in a worried voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you continually serve able to rescue you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and closed the lions' mouths so that they have not harmed me, because I was found to be innocent before him. Nor have I done any harm to you, O king. Then the king was delighted and gave an order to haul Daniel up from the den. So Daniel was hauled up out of the den. He had no injury of any kind because he had trusted in his God. The king gave another order, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their... They did not even reach the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and language groups who were living in all the land, "Peace and prosperity. I have issued an edict that throughout all the dominion of my kingdom, people are to revere and fear the God of Daniel. For he is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His authority is forever. He rescues and delivers and performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.